In a self-defense situation, the adrenaline that's associated with the fight or flight response is responsible for many profound physiologic changes. The point is that there is immediate change to your sensory perception, your metabolism, and your physiologic state. Because of these physiologic changes, the importance of practicing with your particular firearm using the particular rounds you're going to carry cannot be overemphasized. Practicing builds muscle memory, and it also confirms the reliability of your firearm using the specific ammunition that you're going to carry. There's nothing that can replace the act of practicing when it comes to muscle memory. And muscle memory is absolutely critical in the high-stress personal defense kind of situation. Let's start with rimfire versus centerfire debate. Now, usually this debate comes up by someone who chooses to carry rimfire for their personal defense firearm. And they're trying to defend their position by a statement sort of like, well, any gun is better than no gun at all. And while certainly it's true, I'd rather have a 22 long rifle semi-automatic handgun than absolutely no gun at all if I had to defend myself or my family, I really don't think that's a good decision. But there are those who insist on carrying a rimfire gun for personal defense. Now, the two problems that come up with rimfires are power and reliability. So in my opinion, if you choose to carry a rimfire, you should do two things. Number one, you should consider carrying a revolver rather than semi-automatic. And number two, you should consider 22 Magnum over 22 long rifle. So the two reasons to choose the 22 Magnum over the 22 long rifle are, first, the obvious reason, there's just going to be a little bit more power. And then secondly, and probably even more importantly, is the ammunition selection that you have to choose from. There are a lot of personal defense rounds now that are being developed for the 22 Magnum. You have these Spear Gold Dots. They are made for short-barreled revolvers, and they have a very nice gold dot bullet. This is the Hornady Critical Defense 45 grain FTX round. Even something like this Winchester jacketed hollow point, I've read a lot of reviews where these have been used against varmint. People will rant and rave about how well this bullet performs as far as expansion and penetration. And then the second recommendation that I talked about is the revolver versus a semi-automatic. The reason I say revolver is because there is an increased risk of duds when you have a rimfire cartridge. And with a revolver in a self-defense situation, your action is to pull the trigger until that threat goes away. And if you have a dud round, then you're going to be pulling the trigger anyway. That's a pretty simple way to address that, is just to simply pull the trigger again. Whereas, if you carry a gun like this Walther P22, when you have a dud round in a semi-automatic, you first have to recognize that you had a misfire. And while that sounds like it should be, very easy, in a high-stress situation, it's going to take you a little bit of time, a split second perhaps, but still some time to realize that your gun didn't go off and it's not working when you pull the trigger again. So there's a little delay in recognizing the failure to fire, and then you have to perform a clearing action to get rid of that dud round and to rechamber another round before you can try to discharge your firearm again. There are guns like this PMR30 from Kel Tec that hold 30 rounds of 22 Magnum, and it's a semi-automatic gun. But at this point, I just don't think that it's reliable enough to depend on as far as being a carry gun in a self-defense situation. So that's why if you're going to insist on carrying a rimfire, I would suggest at least looking into something like this. Not maybe this particular firearm, but I do like this gun. This is a Smith & Wesson Model 351 personal defense. It has a 2-inch barrel, 7 rounds of 22 Magnum. It is extremely light and very comfortable. If you pull the trigger and there's a dud there, you simply just pull the trigger again. So besides the rimfire debate, then this obviously brings up the whole debate about revolvers versus semi-automatics. And a thorough discussion of this type is certainly way beyond the scope of this video. But I do want to mention just a few major points regarding the debate between revolvers and semi-automatics. There's a few things you have to consider if you're going to choose one of these platforms versus the other. The first thing to consider is how important is a manual safety? For a lot of service guns, one of the requirements that's found frequently is that there is no manual safety. They do not want manual safeties often because they don't want the complexity of having that manual safety present and then one of the officers not remembering to take that manual safety off. They're again in a very high stress situation and the gun not functioning when he needs it to function. But the other side of that coin is that police officers are often shot with their own firearms. They get in an altercation and a bad guy grabs their gun out of their holster and then uses their gun against them. My first carry gun was this Glock 19 with 15 rounds of 9mm. But when I had small children, that changed. In a gun without a manual safety, if a child were to get hold of it or if an adversary were to get hold of that, this gun could be used against you even if they weren't familiar with the operating system of this gun. And so because of my concern of either accidental discharges or this gun being gotten into the wrong hands and then being used against me, I just changed my personal decision regarding my handgun. I'm not saying that a Glock 19 is an absolutely excellent carry gun. It's just that you have to decide under your circumstances whether that's the gun that you want to use. It's a fine weapon. The triggers are nice. They can be even improved even more, and you have high capacity. Because of liability issues, most revolvers and double action only semi-automatics have really heavy, long pull triggers, which brings up the next question and the next consideration in choosing a concealed carry handgun. How important is a nice trigger to you? Now, you certainly don't want a ultralight target trigger for a personal defense handgun, but we do know that shot placement is critical in defending yourself. And the two things that are going to make that more likely, I think, are practice and a nice trigger. And in a gun that has a single action only trigger, then generally speaking, you're going to be dealing with a much lighter, shorter trigger pull. The next consideration in choosing between a revolver and a semi-automatic is how much training will you realistically do? Semi-automatics are more complex in their operation, and they require more training to become familiar and proficient in their operation. So now we come to the caliber debate. When it comes to efficiently and effectively stopping an aggressor, the single most important factor is proper shot placement, and that pretty much is without debate. As far as effectiveness of one caliber versus another caliber, a recent FBI study shows that the single most important aspect of a round is adequate penetration, and they define adequate penetration as 12 to 18 inches of penetration through soft tissue. Now, recent FBI data has also come out that suggests that the 9mm round is actually superior to the .40 Smith & Wesson and showed no significant difference in the field between the effectiveness of the 9mm and the .45. Now, that information is taken based on the improvement of modern personal defense rounds and the availability of better ammunition now than what was available even 10 or 15 years ago. The improved self-defense ammunition that's available today has narrowed the gap between the 9mm and the higher powered rounds. There are lots of very nice products available. This is Federal's HydroShock, Winchester's Ranger, Corbon Plus P rounds. And so there are a lot of rounds to choose from. You need to do your research, and then critically, you need to practice with the self-defense round that you have chosen for your particular handgun. So the caliber debate can rage on. I still like to carry a .45 ACP when I can comfortably conceal that particular gun. Now, my three basic carry guns are here on the table. This is a SIG 238, then a 9mm, the SIG 938, and then a Kimber Ultra Carry in .45. And basically, If I'm wearing a jacket or heavy clothing and I can comfortably conceal the kimber, I would choose to go ahead and carry a 45 ACP. Most often I end up carrying the 9mm with this SIG 938. If it's hot summertime and I'm not wearing heavy clothing and I find it difficult to conceal the 9mm, then that's when I'll use the 238, a very light and smaller package that shoots the 380 ACP. Most of the time I'm able to conceal and carry the 9mm rounds in the SIG. One other point that I'd like to make about concealed carry guns that I think is important is that all of my guns do have the glow-in-the-dark tritium night sights. The SIGs come with these from the factory. The Kimber Ultra Carry came with them from the factory. Night sights are critical in my opinion. If you ever do any range shooting with low light, you'll understand just how important it is to have those sights light up a little bit at night. And I'm not touting the single action only guns that I carry over double action only guns or revolvers. There again, I think that the decision should be made using the considerations that we've discussed about in this video, but you have to match which type of handgun best fits your needs and your preferences. But I think the one important thing to discuss is if you're going to be carrying different guns like I do, I carry different guns based on the time of year and how much clothing I'm wearing. And if you're carrying different guns, I think it's critical to make sure that each gun has a exact or at least very similar operating system. In other words, all of my guns are single action only. They all have a manual safety. They're all carried in a cocked and locked, these are clear, but they're all carried in a cocked and locked condition. And so whether I am carrying the 45 in the winter or whether I am carrying my SIG 238 in the summertime in a little pocket holster, they all have the same kind of operating system. They all have a manual safety. I know that with my thumb, the first thing I've got to do if I want to arm this weapon is I've got to take that safety off. And each one of my guns, even though they're very different in size and they're different in caliber, they have the same feel. When I grab them, the first thing to do is take the safety off, and they all have a relatively light, short throw, single action trigger. You need to investigate your needs, your preferences, and what's available out there, and then make the decision based on what you're comfortable with. So in review, there are 3 critical P's: practice, penetration, and placement. Practice is going to improve and build your muscle memory, which is critical in an emergency situation. Practice is also going to confirm the reliability of the particular firearm and round that you'll be carrying. And it's going to improve your accuracy as you get more familiar with shooting that firearm. Penetration, remember that it's critical to have a round that will penetrate between 12 and 18 inches in soft tissue. And then placement. That penetration has got to be placed so that the permanent wound cavity will involve a vital organ. Now, as far as carrying rimfires, I would suggest that you consider carrying a rimfire 22 Magnum as opposed to a 22 long rifle, and I would suggest that you consider a revolver versus a semi-automatic. Once again, it's your call. You look at all the facts and you try to make the best decision for yourself. Certainly, any firearm is better than no firearm, but I would not recommend a rimfire in a personal defense situation unless that's your absolute only choice. Now, as far as choosing a semi-automatic versus a revolver, there are pros and cons. You need to look at those pros and cons. You need to look at your concerns and your needs and pick the platform that best suits you. Now, when it comes to caliber, this recent FBI study has shown that, at least in their opinion, a 9mm is just as effective as a 40 Smith & Wesson, and a 45 caliber ACP really doesn't offer any major advantages. So once again, that's a decision that you'll have to make, But you do need to understand that whatever caliber you pick or whatever caliber you carry, you need to make sure that it delivers adequate penetration, 12 to 18 inches. If you carry different firearms at different times of the year, I think that it's very critical to make sure that those firearms have the same mechanism of operation. And then don't forget about night sights. I really think that night sights are very important in any carry handgun. I hope you found this information useful. If you did, please consider hitting the like button. Also, if you have any questions or comments, please post those and I'll try to respond to those in a timely fashion. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.